firm, and so I'm going to let him talk a little bit about himself, and he'll walk us back through some of our guidelines. So why don't we give Tony a hand for stepping in?
Thank you, Mr. Bollinger. Again, okay, so my name's Tony Resendez. I'm one of the attorneys, one of the shareholders with the law firm that represents your school district, Walsh, Vegas, Thurvania, Russo, and Kyle. I'm one of the attorneys out of the San Antonio office. I was born and raised in San Antonio. My dad was on the school board growing up. We were very involved in our community. Went off to Texas A&M, had a great time there. Quit in Coriat, I know, is one of your homegrown boys. Went off to U of H for law school. Worked here in Houston for a while, and then made my way back to San Antonio. Have 2 kids, went through the public school system, now in college, one at University of Houston and one at UTSA. So it's very important to me, public education, and representing a school district has been an honor and a blessing. I've been doing it for over 20 years now, and appreciate this opportunity to come here and hopefully help you facilitate this process. And I want to commend you all for the time and commitment that you've already made in this committee. And with this subject matter, I know it's a very sensitive issue with some folks, or with most folks, but it is important. So, you know, just like most communities are kind of like families, you agree to disagree, but at the end of the day, you need to come together and move the district forward, because it's not about you. It's about the students that go through the system. And you want to make sure that they have the support they need moving forward and are prepared for what's ahead of them. I am appreciative of this opportunity. I'm going to do my best, and we're going to move forward. So, thank you. All right, so what we do want to do, I know you've seen these team agreements. Honor the charge, stay on topic, participate with positive suppositions, share the time, make sure everybody has a chance to get comments. But I do want you all to know that, yes, I represent the school district, but I am not going to influence you in any way with regard to what you decide to do. My job here is going to assist with the process and to facilitate the discussion, facilitate the communication between you all as community members and the administration and your chairperson. Now keep in mind, when I say we represent the district, more specifically, we're hired and fired by your school board members. Your school board, they're community members. So we work specifically for the school board. So we're not here doing anybody's will. We're not here trying to force any agenda at all. And I can guarantee you that. Sir, did you have your... Oh, I'm sorry. So I appreciate that feedback, and we'll keep going forward. Thank you. Mutual respect, including civil discourse. Again, we may agree to disagree, and that's okay. You know, I'm from a big family. 10 aunts and uncles on my mom's side, 5 aunts and uncles on my dad's side, cousins. So you can imagine we have discussions, debates. We have Republicans, Democrats, liberals, conservatives, you name it in my family. And we have a lot of discussion about things, but we do the best we can to be civil. And I know you guys are going to do that as well. And again, thank you. Keep the community and students as a priority. Again, as we mentioned, we're here for the students. We're here to make sure that we do the best we can. You're an example for them. So what they hear and what they see is going to be how we behave and how we work together. But I'm confident that we're going to be fine. So, just a reminder, scope of work and committee expectations. And I know you're familiar with these things as well. Meaningful discussion, respectful discussion. It's important. A lot of times people will change their mind if that's what you're trying to do, and that's okay. And if you're not, that's okay too. But you want to be respectful. And that deliberation, that discussion is very important, because it helps people feel like at least they're being heard and they're known the concerns that they have. So it's important. Again, you're familiar with this. Committee members will be committed to the education of the students, and I know you are. Committee members will be committed to the district's mission, and that's developing the whole child. So, okay, let's go on to the next recap on committee scope of work, and that's where your chairperson is going to come in.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you for being here. Looks like people have been filling in, so we got pretty good attendance tonight. Real quick, what we want to do is we want to recap what we've accomplished so far through the first 3 meetings, and also kind of use that as a transition into what we need to get done tonight and at our next meeting. So just real quick, as a committee, we were charged by the school board to evaluate the renaming process and why we would rename and what facilities we would rename. And part of that, we were given 7 committee guiding questions. To date, we've completed the first 5, which are how were facilities originally named in Goose Creek CISD. Mr. Bollinger gave a presentation at one of our first meetings about that. We talked about it. That's going to be part of our report. We discussed why we would consider renaming facilities. We discussed pros and cons of renaming facilities. And we also received a presentation on the cost of changing high school, elementary, and junior high facilities. So you can see we've made pretty good progress on our guiding questions. The two that we have remaining are what is the impacts to students and staff, what's in the best interest of students, and which facilities, if any, need to be considered. So the first of those, we have a survey that we're going to be sending out to students, staff, and the community members, and that's what we're going to use to base that off of. So Mr. Bollinger will talk a little bit more about that later, and we will also be talking about which facilities need to be renamed. We've been working this process the past few weeks between myself, Mr. Resendez, and Mr. Bollinger, and I feel really good about the work that we have tonight and our agenda. So those are our guiding questions, and we also have outcomes. Our charter has 5 outcomes. So it's developing, and some of these overlap. There's developing the pros and cons list for renaming facilities, providing an estimate for facilities, including options and draft timeline, if any, need to be renamed. Proposed recommendations of changes for future decisions about the facility naming process, parameters, and policy. Proposed list of schools that should or should not be renamed, and a proposed recommendation to take no action. So tonight, what we're going to be focusing on is the policy and starting to whittle down that list of things. So that's kind of where we're at, and right now I'm going to turn it over to Dr. McCall. He's going to give us a recap of our pros and cons, the survey that we took.
Thank you. So between our last meeting and this meeting, you were sent an opportunity to give some feedback based on pros and cons. If you can remember a few meetings ago, without really giving a whole lot of explanation to it, we just kind of popcorned some of those pros and cons from the committee, and we were able to write those down, and that informed us on how to create the survey. And so, although all responses are going to be shared with the board, you had an opportunity to see all of the choice options there. We wanted to share with you the more popular options that were selected, just to kind of review this information with you. So on the pros side, being inclusive came in at 35%, progress came in at 26%, local historical achievements came in at 21%, and then we had respect that came in at 18%, if I can see that correctly. And so those are the top 4 reasons that were identified as pros for the name change of the school. Going to the cons for renaming a facility in Goose Creek, at 47% was the cost, the potential cost for that and the use of funds. The financial impact of families and boosters was at 20%. Perception that something is wrong came in at 18%. And then loss of tradition came in at 16%. That evening, I know on the pro side, what was discussed was that naming it after local individuals with historical achievements was listed as a pro. So you were able to, choose that as an option if you so chose to on the pro side. So I think it was just a matter of the meaning behind it when it was identified that night. Yes, ma'am. Okay, I'll turn it back over to Mr. Perry.
All right, I guess I'm back up. We've got a short video that we want to show people real quick. There was a committee on renaming out of Yale University back in 2016. They had a different situation, a different person, different facts surrounding the case, but they had community members that felt like there should be a change. They had community members that felt like the name should be kept. It was on a college, John Calhoun Residential College. And so there's a lot of parallels between what happened at Yale and what's happening in our community right now, the discussion that we're having. And whenever I took over as chairperson, I started doing a lot of research, and I wanted to know more about what's happened around our country with renamings at different facilities, and this committee kept popping up. They talked about it at Texas A&M recently, they talked about it in Wisconsin, they talked about it in Virginia. So everywhere I looked, I kept seeing this name, so I dug in a little bit, I read the report, and want to just kind of present, let everybody watch this. It's not meant to sway anybody one way or another. It's just something that I want the committee to be able to think about, something that may help guide our work a little bit as we move forward over this meeting, next meeting. So please take it with an open mind, and the idea that part of what the work that we're doing here in this committee is not about one name. It's about how we do business here in Baytown and Goose Creek CISD for the next 30, 40, 50 plus years. So with that, we'll play the video.
President Talbot asked us to articulate principles that would govern decisions on whether to rename a building, significant space, or structure on the Yale campus, and we took that seriously.
One thing that really struck me throughout this whole process was that Yale isn't alone in having this sort of conversation.
We're inspired by the Woodward Report, which established principles that are utilized not only at Yale, but frankly our framework for the respect for free speech throughout the country. And so we see ourselves in a similar way establishing a framework for making decisions about tough issues such as the question of when and whether to rename a building or an institution because of the legacy of the namesake.
Well, I would not have joined the committee if I had thought that it was a rigged deal. I obviously a huge amount of the discussion we had was about Calhoun. I did not have a preconceived idea of what the answer was supposed to be, nor did I have a preconceived idea of what I thought the answer was.
We are not going to be operating, producing a document that operates only in this moment. The document we will have failed in our job if the document we delivered can be stamped as a 2016 document, always. We want these principles to be as applicable in 2056 as they are today.
I think in a perfect world, this might have happened a year ago, before any decision was made at all, but the world's imperfect, we all know that, and so I think that the university should be commended for taking a deep breath and a pause and saying, let's go back to basics here and have a framework.
One of the first things we did as a committee was try to separate ourselves from the question that had been mooted about on campus last year over Calhoun College by studying other institutions and by thinking about other places and by thinking about the history and theory of naming and renaming. We spent a lot of time with some work by Robin Winks, a longtime Yale historian, who made a really important distinction between the erasing of history on the one hand and the commemoration of history on the other.
We approached the issue from as many different angles as possible. So looking at theories on naming and renaming, studying the history of some of the namesakes at Yale.
Input came from every direction. God knows there are a lot of talented and learned people in the Yale community, so there's a lot to draw on. And some of it was in conversation, and many people wrote about this.
John Witt gave us 1,200 pages of reading and many hours of talking to people and listening to people. I think one distinction that we made clear was that there's a distinction between naming and honoring.
There was an intentional effort to try to give an opportunity for members of this community to give voice to their ideas, to their concerns, and to give us insight and input so that we could then develop those principles mindful of the values of a liberal arts education and of a free society.
These were not just opinions or statements of emotion. There were very thoughtful arguments on both sides.
When it comes to thinking about renaming, even considering renaming a building, the bar has to be very high. The historian in me understands that we tell stories about who we are by the names that we use for buildings and places and things. So names are important. It's not simply a random choice or an inconsequential choice. When these names run afoul of the values that our institution represents, not the values of our particular moment, but the transcendent values of our institution. And if the the name of the building is in contradiction to those core values, do we need to start thinking seriously about those, about that name?
I think the principles are ones that thoughtfully have limiting factors and conditions that should be considered whenever the whenever there is a question about whether there should be a renaming.
You really have three windows into history. One, the life and times of the person who is the namesake. Second, and that can take place at some point in history. Another window in is when was the naming decision made, and what occasioned the decision, and what informed the decision. And then finally, today's student life and community, you know, how does that inform what was done at different points in history? So I think that was, among many things, a really fascinating part of any inquiry, looking at, you know, windows into different moments in history when different decisions were made, and then to see how it holds up and reflects in today's community.
You have to look at all three of those and say, you know, was this person just completely out of line with the university's values at any of those three times? If so, which ones, and by how much?
We need to have humility as a current generation and about imposing our ideology on all generations in the past and all generations in the future. I think we should have respect for the past. On the other hand, I think that there are clearly circumstances where naming and therefore honoring can interfere with the legitimate mission of the university.
Names are important symbols, and they have meaning, and they inform and define the values of the community, and sometimes they ought to be re-examined.
Certain renamings can be erasing. If one were to rename and then ignore the past history of the name, then that would really be an erasing of history that might be dangerous from any number of perspectives.
There's a distinction between erasing history and between honoring somebody in the voice of the university, for example. And that was a distinction that wasn't, necessarily all that clear to me.
But it is pretty clear that you can rename without erasing. You can rename and add history. You can do various programming. You can create plaques and the like, which can make sure that you memorialize the fact of the history in all of its ugliness, if it's ugly. And some of the history, of course, is ugly.
We would be doing disservice to our own values, value of research and knowledge, if we didn't address those things. So I think renaming is not a repudiation. It is something the university must weigh very carefully. But that's what scholarship does. It weighs things very carefully, makes a decision.
When I think about what this committee says about Yale, I think it says something important about an institution that wants to take principles and ideas seriously, and also wants to confront really important questions about how to organize a campus that's diverse and inclusive, and it should be diverse and inclusive, while also maintaining really important traditions of free expression and academic expression at the same time.
Is the microphone on?
All right. So I want to take a minute. We've got a tight schedule here tonight, but I want to open up the floor. If you have a brief statement that you'd like to make, any insights or comments, or just please be brief so we can keep going. We just had a couple of quick slides with some summary information from the video. We have a printout of the entire report. The report's 26 pages. It's a great report. I recommend reading it. There's a lot of good information in there. But just some real quick highlights. They make a very strong case that that people take a presumption against renaming, and a lot of the arguments that they make are things that we've heard here locally about learning from history, not erasing history. That names are important. that people tell their story based on the names of facilities, places that they went to school. And I think in our first meeting we heard that. I mean, how many people here, one of the first things they said was, I'm a graduate of Robert E. Lee High School, or I'm a graduate of Ross F. Sterling. It builds community, and you tell your story based on that. And then also that humans are imperfect. I think one of the gentlemen in the video said something that we shouldn't impose our ideology on people in the past. We need to focus on principled legacies of people rather than trying to kind of nitpick their character. So that they make a strong case against renaming, but then at the same time, catch up with the slides real quick. They also do open the door for why you would rename. So again, things that we've heard here in Baytown, where the principal legacy of the namesake is at odds with the mission and values of the district, where the legacy of the namesake was contested even in the time and place that person lived, and that the reasons at the time of naming were at odds with the district's mission and values. So then just kind of summary considerations after deciding to rename or not rename. They talk about if you are renaming, that you should ensure that you do not erase history. Talking about plaques or signage or some way of remembering what actually happened, even if it is ugly. And then if you're keeping the name, you want to make sure that it's not distorting history. So at this point, we are going to turn this over to Mr. Bowen.
Okay, so one of our outcomes that we have listed for the committee is listed right up here, and you also have it on the slide on your handout. Proposed recommendations or changes, if any, regarding future decisions about the facility naming process, parameters, and policy. And so the line of thinking is that we just watched an example of a committee who went through and attempted to build a framework or a lens to make decisions on whether or not schools should be renamed or not renamed. We have a board policy in place, and one of the questions, one of the outcomes is listed right here, where this committee will not change policy, but we will provide input to the board on whether or not they want to look at policy and make changes either in the past, or the present, or in the future. And so what we want to do is we want to spend a little bit of time looking again at Goose Creek policy to see what the rules are right now, what does the policy state, and then what we want to do is show you some sample criteria from about 10 other districts throughout the state of Texas and beyond. And that way you can just have sort of a compare contrast. This is what Goose Creek says in their CW policy, or the policy that names facilities, and then this is what other districts have that differ. And then at the end of that, what we're going to do is actually pass out iPads, and then we're going to go through and vote on which criteria do you feel like is important or not important. Does that make sense? So you can identify, hey, this as a committee, we think this criteria is very important. We think this item, we don't need to add that, or we don't need to take that one away. Okay? So first of all, Dr. McCall is going to talk a little bit about the local policy, and I'm going to let him lead that piece, and then we'll look at other policies.
So on your table, you have a copy of CW Local, which is the policy for GCC ISD as it relates to naming facilities. As Mr. Bollinger stated, we're going to just spend some time reviewing some of those important points from this policy, but then also do some comparing and contrasting with other policies from other school districts. And so just to highlight a few points from CW Local. Deceased person who has attained prominence locally and or nationally. And so you see that there in GCC ISD, the name of a living person shall not be considered for a facility. Next point, must have made a significant contribution to society or the district. Name should lend prestige and status to the school. And citizens and students are called upon to nominate persons representing all cultures. And so as you see there, all of that is listed pretty much in the bullet points 1, 2, 3, and 4. And there's some additional explanation that's there. Please be sure to read it through in its entirety. Of course, we're just providing the major points of it, keeping in mind that this is our current GCC ISD policy, and as Mr. Bollinger stated, there will be an opportunity for us to provide feedback to the school board as it relates to this policy.
Okay, so what do other policies say? So what do other policies say? So first of all, what we've noticed is that most districts use the same language or similar language in board policy. So if you just go and start looking at CW local policy across different websites, you'll find that it sounds very similar to ours. So that's the first thing. This is the reason for this is because Texas Association of School Boards helps provide guidance on board policy, and so that language is similar throughout the state. Also wanted to make this point, in other instances you'll see that there are some very specific policies to local districts that differ from ours, and so that's what we want to point out to the committee in this next part. So we're going to review various criteria that are stated in other policies, and the intent is to as a committee member, to think, hey, is this a policy that maybe the board should consider adopting or not adopting, okay? So, here we go. So, acceptable names. And so again, I'm just showing you various policies from various districts. Facilities may or shall be named after the following. So some districts have this item here. Any local, state, or national geographic area, landmark, or physical attribute. Okay? Now we know in Goose Creek that we have schools named after geographical attributes. We have San Jacinto, we have Alamo, but it's not explicitly stated in our policy. And so just wanted to point that out. Another one is this. This differs slightly from the first bullet. Geographical or historical relationships in which the site is located. So according to this school district, you can name a school after a geographical location as long as there's some sort of relationship to that location. A good example would be San Jacinto. We're very close to where the Battle of San Jacinto occurred, so that would make sense to have a school named after that. San Jacinto in Dallas would not make as much sense according to this policy here. Facilities may be named after instructional focus of the school. So what does that mean? That means that, like for example, in Houston, there's several magnet schools named after the focus that that school is attributed to. And so that would be an example here. Aspirations of the school. So you're sitting in a school named Impact Early College High School. That may be an example, making an impact in society. And then there's variations of the individual being alive or not being alive. Some policies said they must have been dead for 5 years. Others said they must be deceased unless there's a special exception. So there's various, there's some options there on that one. Okay, so that's acceptable names, All right, I think I have 3 slides for you on this, so stay with me. The second slide is accomplishments. Okay, facilities may or shall be named after individuals who have done what? And so the first one says here, attain prominence locally and or nationally in the fields of, and then it goes on to answer various fields. That's actually our policy, so if you want to read that in depth, you can. Attained achievements of extraordinary and lasting distinction in the district and or county. So the difference here is, according to this school district, that the person must have made an impact locally, within the county or within the district. So you can see the difference. I'm just pointing out the difference. We have locally or nationally. They do not. To narrow it even more, this district says must have had direct, substantial, and active association with the district. So according to this school district, we only name schools after people in our community. And so you have 3 different options here that look different. And then last, facilities may be named after individuals who have made a significant contribution to society, and his or her name should lend prestige and status to the school. That's in several policies. That's also in Goose Creek policy. Okay, so the first category was acceptable names, and the second category was accomplishments. The last category is values and culture. Facility names shall, so this is one example, consider the diverse community that they serve. So one school district had that item. Another school district or school districts had respect cultural differences and values. This comes from the Yale committee work that we just saw. Ensure the principal legacy of the individual aligns with or reflects the district's mission, vision, and core values and beliefs. So they identify the principal legacy of that individual. And then last, several districts had this item: avoid duplicating names of other facilities in the district so that you don't have multiple buildings named after the same individual or landmark. Okay, so here's the question. Which criteria mentioned above, if any, I think that's important, if any, this committee may opt not to change anything in the policy, and that's fine. But the question is, which criteria mentioned above, if any, should be recommended and applied to the Goose Creek facility naming and renaming process? So again, we've made this point multiple times. We've also made it with the media that this committee is not a decision-making committee. They're making recommendations to the board. The board has been elected to make decisions, but they want input from various citizens. And so what we're going to do at this time, this is a good chance to take a stretch break. Okay, so 88, very similar to the other question. 88% say yes, 12% say no. Next question, so again, these are questions based off of other school policies that we're considering for recommendation. Should the Goose Creek CISD policy allow for considerations of the living persons? Yes or no? Okay, so 71% of us say no. 29% of us say yes. Okay, next question. Should the Goose Creek CISD policy require that the individual be affiliated or associated with the local district or community? Okay, we've had all 34 vote. Okay, so this is one that's a little bit more divisive. 53% say no, 47% say yes. Next question, do you believe the Goose Creek policy should include the following: the individual's principal legacy, i.e. the key activity, advocacy, or accomplishment for which the individual is most known, aligns with the district's mission, vision, and core values? I think we're waiting on one more vote. Here we go. Okay, so 74% say yes, 26% say no. Okay, I'm sorry. I guess it's catching up. 72% say yes, 28% say no. Okay, next question. Do you believe the Goose Creek CISD policy should include the following? School facility names should consider the diverse community they serve. Yes, all of these are, no, I'm not stating that it's future. I'm stating that this should be included in the board policy. The school board would have that in their policy if they adopt it, or they may not adopt it. And then they would make the decision. Moving forward, it would for sure be used. Whatever they adopt, it would be for sure used moving forward for policy. It would be up to the school board to determine if they want to revisit renaming a facility when we pass. What the outcome is that this committee is recommending changes, if any, to school board policy. And so that's what we're doing now, is we're providing recommendations if we think the school board should adjust the policy as it is now or not adjust it. Policy is updated from time to time, but again, it's what this committee is recommending for the school board policy as it is right now. What's in place for the school board policy.
Right.
And I'll say that just as a reminder, so we're showing you questions. We just looked at different school district policies, and so we're pulling those same exact policies, and we're asking this committee: is this something the board should put in our policy? Just ideas. So we're going to go ahead. It's always their interpretation. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and click the button. 71% of you agree with this policy that should be included. 29% say no. Okay, let's go to the next question. I think we have two more. Do you believe the Goose Creek CISD policy should include the following? The name must not already be in use by another district, school, or facility. Back in business? Okay. Okay, we'll give you a little bit more time on this one. We have 29 voters so far. Again, do you believe the Goose Creek policy should include the following? The name must not already be in use by another district, school, or facility.
Now, Mr. Bollinger, not to complicate this one, but I believe some of the policies that we read referenced districts in the area so that you're not duplicating the same name within a certain area. Are we considering that as well here?
No.
Or just within the district?
Just within the district. So, okay, so what this question, what the intent of this question is if you have the same name in that school district, then either you rename that building or you name the new building something else. You don't have two buildings with the same name. Just like Green Center would be an example. By another district school or facility. So, if the wording is not clear, I'm clarifying it. It means that within the same district, you don't have two names with the same name with two buildings, okay? So you can clear your response. Okay, so 88% agree with this, 12% say no. And I think we have one more question. Okay, so this is the last question. Goose Creek policy states, so we're going to end sort of how we began. Goose Creek policy states that the person must have made a significant contribution to society and his or her name should say lead prestige and status to the school. Should say lend prestige and status to the school. Do you believe this policy should be revised or expanded? Read it one more time. Goose Creek policy states that the person must have made a significant contribution to society and his or her name should lend prestige or status and status to the school. Do you believe this policy should be revised or expanded? Give it about 5 more seconds. Okay? Okay, so 56% say yes, 44% say no. So what we'll do is in our summary, like we talked about, we'll have this pushed out to the community and the committee on different responses based off of the committee's voice here. And so we'll show that. So we're going to move on to our next piece. That took a little bit longer than we thought, but I think we're still pretty close to our time. We're trying to stick to our time limits at this meeting. So Thomas and Tony are going to talk about what he just referred to as far as looking at facilities in Goose Creek.
All right, well, we can talk for a second real quick. So that just helped us complete one more of our outcomes, which is providing recommendations to the school board on changes to CW local. Again, we're making recommendations, we're not the decision maker. So this data is going to be presented to the school board. They'll be able to see the percentages of how the committee felt on different things and be able to weigh their decisions based on our input. So thank you again for helping us with that one. So what we're going to do now is we're going to start whittling down the list of facilities that we're going to be talking about moving forward, specifically at our next meeting. So what we're going to do is we're going to go, we got some slides queued up here with all of the facility names in Goose Creek CISD. If you believe that one of the names that's up on the list should be changed, I want you to raise your hand. If 4 or more committee members believe that there should be more discussion about that name, we're not going to make the decision tonight, but if you believe that there should be more discussion about that name, raise your hand. 4 or more, we're going to put that on the list for our next meeting. So any facility that does not get 4 or more is not going to be considered. It's going to be put on our list of facilities that will not be considered for renaming. So if we can start going through the slides, we'll start. So what we're going to ask is if you feel like the name should be changed and you raise your hand, we ask that you would be willing to speak at the next meeting or form up with a group to speak at the next meeting and present a case to the committee as to why that name should be changed based on the discussions that we've had, what we've reviewed, the guidelines, the recommendations to policy that we're making, based on the work of the committee, why that name should be changed. And we'll also allow time for people that feel like the name shouldn't be changed. It'll also give them time to prepare. And so if you raise your hand, just please be aware that we'll ask you to either speak to it or group up with some people to speak to it. So without further ado, I think, at the first meeting, we all received a packet that had every facility. It had information about the namesake of that facility. And one of the things that we're that we talked about tonight and that we saw and we agreed to was that we would be looking towards the principal legacy of the namesake. That we're not going to be looking for little bits of dirt on that person to justify renaming or not renaming that facility. We want to set the bar high, and that's why, and at the same time, we also want to allow for people to say, well, I'm not really sure about this one, so maybe it does warrant a little bit more discussion. But the intent of this is that we're going to whittle down the list where we know that we're not going to change Stephen F. Austin or Travis or something like that. I'm just throwing out examples. I'm not telling you how to vote on those. But we know as a committee that there are quite a few that we don't even need to talk about. But when we send out our information to the public, because part of our committee charge was that we would provide some of our recommendations preliminary to the public to say this is what we're considering. So one of the things that we felt would be important is to tell the public these are the names that we're not considering. That way they have an opportunity to comment on the ones that we are. So if we have a list of 5, then that allows the public to comment more specifically on those 5 or 3 or 1 or 20. So we're just trying to get the list down a little bit so we knew kind of how to set the agenda for the next meeting and to provide some input to, or some information out to the community about what we're considering. What I'm hearing from the committee is that you're not ready to make that decision at this point. So I think what we need to do is we need to take a step back. We need to allow the committee to think about it for a couple of days, and I guess we would send out an electronic survey.
Well, hang on. It sounds like that I saw some folks like the idea of, not tonight, but in the future, after we have some more clarification of what policy might look like in terms of recommendations that we all just did. And then maybe have some that we know we may not want to change for sure, but some we just need more information about, and then some that we do want to change. Somebody came up with that, and I saw some people nodding their head.
Only to the people that are permitted here.
But we want your feedback. Yes, sir.
Well, again, the intent here was not to vote yes or no on whether or not the committee wanted to rename that school. It was to continue discussing, or to set up the discussion for those particular schools.
The administration had an idea, looks like. And let's give them an opportunity to get some input.
So
they've heard. This is really good feedback. This is really good feedback.
So what we've been hearing a few times is that maybe we need to take some more opportunities to research who these schools were named after, or even understanding some of the landmarks that maybe the schools were named after, or the historical events, whatever it is. But in order for us to provide some more time, and we certainly want to do that, but that's the direction that we're going, and we can send out an electronic version of what we're doing tonight after giving you a couple of days, a week, however long we discuss. But that's going to require some homework on everyone that's on this committee, of course, to inform yourselves. Of course, you have the facilities vision guide that was given to you the first night, and you may have some other, references that you can use or things that you can read up on, whatever it is you see fit to do your research so that you can make an informed decision. I think that that's the piece that I'm hearing over and over again, that people just don't feel like I'm able to make an informed decision at this moment. But if we decide to walk away from this meeting and maybe send a survey out in 3 or 4 days, then we need to make sure that we're doing the homework to be informed so that we can respond to that survey electronically. So that's the compromise that Mr. Bollinger and I were speaking of, or talking about over here, and just wanted to present that to the group.
Again, just to articulate or reiterate what Thomas said is are there any facilities that are just not up for debate? And that's the intent of this activity, is out of the 28 schools that we have, or the 34 facilities total, can we pull some of those off the table just the process of elimination? So that's the intent of the activity. If you need time to dig a little bit more and then we send it out in a few days, we can do that too. So we're good with either way.
Yes.
That was going to be my feedback. We have to do the best we can with the information that we're able to locate, whether you have books or if you rely on the internet, how you receive your information. Because resources, as we know, and just studying resources, they can be biased as well if you're looking at them. So you do the best you can with the information that's readily available.
I I think we got to kind of wrap this up a little bit. We're past our time. So what I would ask is Dr. McCall and Mr. Bollinger will take this to an electronic survey. If you believe, we'll work out the details of the survey. We'll ask that you get your responses in a timely fashion. That way we can plan out for the next meeting. And I do think that we would like to potentially follow the steps that we were talking about. So if we can just bring up what our meeting number 5 was real quick.
Sure, and just to recap, so how about give them about a week, and then we can send that out, and that'll give you another week to complete it.
Okay.
So that's kind of what we're looking at. Well, I want to go back. We started this process on November 30th, and the books were passed out at that time. And so the idea is that if there's a facility that you're really concerned about, then that's what we want to go.
I think we'll just cross them off on the electronic survey. Everybody will just go through and check those real quick. So move it to an electronic survey. That way everybody has an opportunity to do some research and provide feedback through that route. And again, it's just going to set up our discussion that will start taking place at the next meeting. So at the next meeting, we want to have a preliminary report covering the items that we have already accomplished. We have 4 of our 5 outcomes done at this point, quite a few of our questions complete, so we can start looking at what our report to the board would look like. We're going to review our report on the community staff and student feedback surveys that are going to start going out. I believe Mr. Bollinger is targeting the day after tomorrow. Start sending out those surveys to the community staff and students, so we'll start having some feedback there. And then we can start having, again, some discussions about individual facilities, and then start voting to make our recommendations on individual facilities. We plan on using a scale where you can either say that you strongly agree, strongly disagree, you're kind of neutral on it, and that way we get good feedback to the board. They'll be able to see the average of what the committee thinks, as well as the distribution of the votes, to see if it's nobody really has a strong opinion one way or another, and that's why I got a 3, or I got a 3 because there were 21s and 25s. So important information for the board to have. So
we're sending out in a variety of ways. First of all, with our email system and our text system, we send that out. We push it through social media, and then we also put it on our website. And so those are the avenues. And if you want to do a paper survey, just like we did with the rezoning survey, you're welcome to do that. We just finished the rezoning survey that we pushed out, and we had a really good response rate to it.
Set a deadline for when responses need to be in, and after that time is completed, we will send out an email letting the committee members know what the responses are and what to be prepared for at the next meeting. And that's actually one of the things that we talked about, and the idea when we were coming into this meeting was that we would have that list kind of whittled down, and there might be 3 facilities, and people would be able to say, okay, let's work together on these 3 or 4 facilities. It's kind of changing up a little bit, but I believe a lot of people in here know each other, and so we would definitely recommend, if you can work together in groups, to work together in groups and prepare for the next.
Yes, 1 vote, 1 time. And the question was brought up, 4 or more would allow us to warrant a discussion. So I think we need to move that deadline up so we can send out that list in advance. And so if we can move that deadline up to about February 8th, that gives you several days, if you don't already know, to dig in deep. We'll try to get the survey out. Remember, we're talking about 2 different surveys. So the committee survey, just for you guys, we'll try to get that out by the end of the day tomorrow. We have to build it electronically, and then that gives you until February 8th. We'll send out some information on which schools have been tagged. And if we're going to still go with 4 more, that'll be easy to do. That's what he was asking. And so in the past, we've only done 1 survey, and that was anonymous. And so we can add your name and then just keep that anonymous just so we can check records. And we would be fine doing that. And so if everyone's okay with that, well, let's just do a vote real quick. Raise your hand if you're okay with what we're requiring you to put your name in before you go in and state which facilities you want to consider discussing. Okay, so that's majority. So which facilities we're looking at.
Right. And again, it'll be which facilities you want to continue discussion on. It's not whether you feel like it should be renamed or not at this point. All right, any other questions? All right, meeting adjourned.
Thank you, everybody.